there's always light in the dark. There really, really, really is. And it's not to negate how hard the dark is. And it's not to be all toxic positivity. It's simply to make room for both and live in the tension.
I'm excited to bring you this author interview with Justine Volker. Now, we were getting together to talk about her most recent book that will be launching in June 7th, but we had such an amazing conversation just about courage and curiosity and all the crazy things that have been going on in all of our lives for the past 2 years that I decided to do 2 parts. So this video will go over that amazing conversation that we had before we really started to dive into her new book. And part 2 will be talking about her journey in the book, more about what this book is about, 100 devotionals for kids with anxiety, and just learning more about her as the author. Now, Justine has over 20 years of experience in the mental health and personal development industries, but she's also served a lot of different corporations. Going in, she is a licensed Dare to Lead trainer. So she goes into different corporations to help talk about courageous leadership. And then she's published a lot of different works as well. So I hope you check out some of her books. But now onto our conversation. And so I'm actually just curious if you don't mind starting with, because the way I met you was when you were coming to facilitate one of the Dare to Lead um, sessions at Royal Canin. And so do you mind just telling us a little bit about how you got started there and how that has been a big part of your full career?
Yeah. So I'm a licensed professional counselor by trade. So I've been in some capacity of mental health work since I was 19. So for over 21 years. And so, because I started right away in college, I started my career in working with clients who struggle with substance abuse. And then I moved here to St. Louis for graduate school, and I fell into working with clients who struggle with eating disorders. And then I had my own private practice for 11 years. And then when my husband and I went through our infertility journey, and it did not end with the hoped for and prayed for and paid for result of babies. That's when I discovered Brene Brown's first TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. So like, the fourth or fifth most viewed TED Talk of all time. And I just, in my whole life, just changed. Like, how can I see this woman speak in person? And so that's when I realized that I actually can teach her work. I can apply, get accepted, go train. And so that was over 8 years ago that I went to Texas and trained with Brene and the team. And so I'm certified in all of her curriculum. So Daring Way, Rising Strong, Dare to Lead, and then Bold. And so I've focused we're coming up on 4 years of me leaving a thriving private practice as a therapist to take the risk to speak and teach and go into the corporate realm. And so that's really been my focus. Is I work with organizations of all sizes and in all kinds of industries. And I get to teach them courage. I get to teach them the skills, tools, and language of how to live, love, and lead more courageously. And for me, that means bringing a lot of who I am and my story to my work. And so that includes my health journey, that includes my infertility journey. And because one of my biggest passions and I think gifts is to really teach courage is in this aspect of, I want people to stay curious and loving and empathic and just learn how to ooze grace. Even if you don't call it grace, fine, I'll call it generosity, right? Like, because sometimes grace can be a loaded word, right? Like, because religion has hurt a lot of people. And so, goodness, the world needs more generosity.
Amen.
Yeah. So like, that's real. I mean, that's what I'm doing. And along the way, I've written, I think technically 9 books at this point. And I've gone the route of everything, really applying and it's not submitting to publishing houses and agents. And I mean, I think a couple of years ago, I got a rejection on my first book from a publishing house, literally 4 years. No, it would have been 7 years, I think, to when I submitted.
You're officially an author. You got a rejection.
I was like, that book was published like 5 books ago. And so I've gone the route of hybrid publishing and been fairly burnt on it. And so I always tell people, like, write the book, like if you, I think everyone has a book in them. Most people will never write it. Write the book. It's needed. Even if you think it's been written before, write it. It's never been written in your voice and with your story and your experiences. And so write the book. And if you really want to go for traditional publishing, go for it. Just know that it's a very different world than it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And it takes a very, very long time. And I mean, I have a girlfriend that writes, and sometimes she'll get tripped up and like comparison. I was like, you need to remember that Ever Upward, my first book, came out 7 years ago. And I'm just now getting a book underneath a big publishing house. And it's not like I got a one-off contract, right? Like I didn't get like a book deal contract. We have this book concept. You have been pitched to write it. We really think that you need to write it. Are you willing to do it? And so and I felt called to write this book. And I mean, it may go somewhere, right, with a bigger contract. It may not. And so in which case, I even told my editor, I was like, I'll continue to self-publish, even if you all in traditional publishing look down on it. Because for me, if I have words in a story that I think can serve the world, I want them in people's hands.
Yeah. I see a lot of people going more self-published route. So I don't
you have so much more control, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you own it. Like you own it for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So I think the bad reputation around self-publishing is not that anymore.
I think it's shifted. I really do. And as I have a girlfriend publishing her first book, and she's like, I'm getting stuck. I was like, where are you at? And she goes, I'm stuck on acknowledgments and formatting and things like that. I go, hire someone off of Fiverr.
Oh yeah.
Like Chad taught him, because like my husband Chad was like, you're obviously going to keep writing, so I'm going to learn how to format this stuff. And like once you kind of get into it, but it was hours and hours and hours of our time. And I was like, pay someone on Fiverr. They'll charge you hardly nothing because they can turn it around in a second. And so that, like, even for my children's book, Pelia, the Marvel, that's what I did. Because we were having trouble formatting the illustrations. We could not get it lined up. And so I was like, this is silly. We're wasting time and bandwidth. Like, hire someone off of Fiverr. That's literally what they do all day long, is just turn it around, turn around, turn around. That is worth your investment.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have been following you on social media as well. And I love the message around courage. Because like you said, I think that's never gonna be an old message or, a not relevant message. But I think with the past 2 years, because it's been, when I met you, that was way before the pandemic. I loved being able to learn from you. And like I said, I'm so glad that we have businesses who are willing to bring in people who can teach us courage, right? That's not exactly something a big CEO or a business may think about, but it's so vital into growing your people. And if you don't have strong, courageous people, you're not going to have a good, strong business. Right. And so I would love to hear what you've observed the past couple of years when it comes to businesses, courage. Like what have been your observations?
I think that one of the things I keep hearing the same concerns from companies. I tell people, like, I of course I will shift some of my language to go with your industry, to go with your culture and things like that. And you all are special in like who you are. And I need you also to know that like, there's a lot of common humanity. Like you are not alone. Like the issues that you are struggling with, almost everyone is, right? This like flexible work schedule, the hybrid piece, the generational element, right? Like people are working longer and they have a generation of people coming behind them that they don't understand. And now they're all working together. So we have a lot of that happening. And when it came to the last 2 years, there was a lot of comparison in regards to like who had it harder. And it's like, no, it's all just really freaking hard. It's hard. Let's stop competing for the Pain Olympics trophy. Like who wants to be number one in that?
I don't want to win that one.
I don't want to win that. My life was the hardest. Like, and when we compare our losses, our traumas, our tragedies, like when we compare our hards, then we're even more alone in it. And we already feel really alone most of the time. And so it's not helpful. And so I've seen a lot of that. I think one of the biggest pieces too is just we've lost our ability to yes, I think in some ways for a lot of people think critically, because they're just consuming things that only confirm what they believe. They're
Mm,
not,
yep.
their social media walls, the books that they read, their news sources, the people that they sit in a boardroom with, the people that they sit at the dinner table with, all look and think and believe like them. And that's dangerous. It's so, so dangerous. And the data doesn't support that that is a healthy culture. Like,
Mm,
the more diverse the table, the healthier the culture. And so, but that has created so much division and just that confirmation of what I believe, that like we've not only lost our ability to think critically, also because we're so dang tired
yeah.
and just weary and burnt out. We are all traumatized at this point. We were not made to withstand what we have lived through. No one was, no one has been. And so, but we've lost, and I think the biggest piece is we've lost our ability to stay curious. And like, you learn one thing about someone, and like there's plenty to pick from when it comes to the last 2 years. You learn one piece of information and you make up their entire lifetime of stories.
Yeah.
And it's not true. Rather than getting curious of like, wow, I'm really surprised by that. I would love to hear more if you're willing to share. Can you help me understand how come you believe that? And we come to these conversations while sitting beside people, and it can be done virtually, with humble, curious, empathic courage. And we seek to understand them without the judgment and the shame and the blame, trying to convince them, trying to get them to think like us. That's not helpful. Seeking to understand people does not mean that the end goal is to all be the same. Like, how horrible would the world be if we all thought the same? Like, it'd be even worse than we are right now. But we've lost that. We've lost it for so many different reasons. So I think that's one of the biggest things that companies are seeing. And because everyone is very different, it doesn't mean that we can please everyone in the decisions that we are making. And at the same time, we can still have really tough conversations about what does this look like going forward? Because for me, I believe that the next several years will be even harder than these last 2 years. We have not even begun to see the ramifications of these last 2 years on people, both physical health wise, whether or not they have long COVID, or they didn't take care of their health for many reasons, or the stress dealt with their health in not so great ways, the spiritual ramifications, the mental health, the emotional, the connection piece. Like, I think the next several years are going to be way harder than the last two.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that. I think because especially because I've heard several companies are talking about coming back to work, in the physical sense of back to work. And I think being the way we have been for the past 2 years, that transition is going to release a lot of these challenges going forward. And I think what you've been talking about, being isolated, we are more and more, we've surrounded ourselves with only our own perspective. I think social media just propagates it, because that's how the algorithm works, right?
Mhm.
Is you like something, so it keeps feeding you that, instead of allowing you to understand a range of perspectives. And so I think there's going to be a clash as we transition out. So what are now I could talk about what businesses should do
Yeah.
all day long. And I think that's great. And I think that there's a place for that. But I think ultimately it comes down to, what can I control, me, myself? So what are your recommendations for this transition, this going into the next phase of the way of life? What are
Yeah.
your
One of
recommendations?
the biggest things I teach is, and this is the therapist background in me, like most of us weren't taught how to ask for what we want and need.
Mm,
And we're not asking for what we want and need in a clear way, which is kind. To speak our expectations clearly is kind. And when we don't ask for what we want and need from the people we work with, from the people we live with and love, like, we stand no chance of getting it, because people cannot read our minds. we may ask for what we want and need and not get it. Someone may not have what we need. And then we get to wrestle that out, right? Like there's grief that can come with that, loss, frustration. And we got to go figure out like, where else can we go find what we need if that person cannot give it or will not or doesn't have it. If they cannot and will not, they don't have it. Like people are not withholding from us on purpose. But there's this element of like asking for what you want and need. Even for me, so my husband, they're back in the office 2 days a week. They'll eventually go to 3 days, kind of flexible schedule. And we kind of sit down every week and kind of say like, okay, what days do you need to be in the office? Because I have events on these days. I could really use your backup with the dogs on those days. Like we just try to figure out what those days look like and we make do. And so like we live in a home right now that's under construction, and the construction world is like when the crew calls and says they can be there, you have to figure out how to make it work, right? Like, because it's just, everything is so delayed. And so like, even the tile guys were like, we can come on Tuesday. I was like, so I have a virtual event in the morning. I was like, Chad, can you be here? And he was like, yeah, I can be here because we need it done. Right. And so it's just one of those pieces, like to really set boundaries, ask for what you want and need. One of the other pieces is like, Chad's back in the office 2 days a week. And so I've set some boundaries that we are struggling with keeping because I honestly I'm probably 75 in the soul. My belly is 85. I want to eat dinner at 5. Okay. Like, and I realize that is not realistic, especially on the days that he goes to the office, right? Like he sits in traffic, right? No matter pretty much what time he leaves, there will be traffic. And so I was like, okay, you need to be in the office. I believe in that, right? I also know that you can do your job from home, but creativity, problem solving, courageous conversations, like I don't believe that virtual will ever 100% replace that. I think it can when it has to. I do think a more flexible work schedule is probably going to be best for most people, not all people. And so one of my boundaries, like, look, dinner, as in like food is in our mouth at 6:30. You need to do what, like, because I also know that you can go back into the home office and finish your day if you absolutely need to. But like, I want dinner with my little family. Like, I don't want to give that time back. This horrible experience of these 2 years gave us some gifts, and that was one of them. Yeah. And so one of the things that we're really struggling with is like, 6:37, 6:39. And I'm like, okay, now it's 6. Like now you get to be home at 6. and our conversations are always, he's like, headed home. I'm like, it's 6:04. And so it's one of those things that we have to wrestle out with generosity and kindness, asking for what we want and need. It cannot just be a hardcore boundary. That's not possible. Like every organization right now, they're in a really tough spot in a lot of different things. And so like, there will be days that he just cannot get out the door. And so I think the biggest thing that all of us can be doing is asking for what we want and need clearly, while also knowing that you may not get it. And then we get to do our own stuff, right? Then we get to wrestle with our own stuff of like, all right, they don't have it. Like they don't want it. Like what does that bring up for me? And how do I go find it somewhere else? Is it within me? Can I get it for myself? Do I need to find it from another support person? But people truly are not living to make you mad. People are not lazy. People are not withholding from us on purpose. They do not enjoy messing up or failing. I do believe people are doing their best.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean their best is good enough for us, which that's where boundaries come in. Like, right. Like I'm like, when Chad texted me last night, I'm leaving 6:04. I'm like, your best is not good enough for me. You're lucky because we had breakfast for dinner last night. I'm like, you're lucky the bacon's not done. Like,
yeah. I think a lot of that is, in a different form of the word grace,
yes.
Is yes, speaking what you need very clearly,
yeah.
Not having a hissy fit if you don't get it all the time. Right. But just communicate clearly. And it's something that I've worked with my husband on. I remember when we first got married, he was very nervous around disagreeing. And so if I use the term, let's talk about that, or let's have
Yeah.
a conversation. He was so nervous. Like he was
Yeah.
just dreaded it. Oh no. And I told him, this is a good thing.
Yes.
It's
Right.
good to talk about these things. And so
Right.
I tried to make it a very good
Right.
situation. But that's it, is when you have to explain, this is why I feel this way, or just I feel this way.
Right.
And if you can elaborate on the why,
Right.
not everybody can understand why
No,
they feel certain
no.
ways, which is
Right.
actually one reason I loved Brene Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart. Have you read
Yes.
that one yet?
Yes. And so, and the HBO Max launches today,
Oh,
actually launched today.
that's
Yeah.
right. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I have to write that
So
down.
I think they launched all 5 episodes right away. So,
Oh,
so
good. We
I'm
can binge.
very excited. I'm very excited to watch it. That book is beautiful. And like,
Yeah.
and I've had so many people that have read all of her books, and like, I do think it's different than any of her books, right? Like
Yep.
so different. And so you got to kind of open it with a different expectation. And at the same time, like we were not taught how to talk about our feelings, feel them, allow them to move through, cope with them in a healthy way. We were also taught that when we spoke about our feelings, that people had to understand them or agree with them. And that's not, I oftentimes have to look at guys like, I don't need you to get how come I feel this way. I don't need you to agree with it. I want to feel seen. That's the empathy skills, right? Like that's it. Like we don't need people to get it. I mean, it's nice, right? Like, but empathy is not necessarily like agreeing with how someone feels. It's identifying with the emotion that's underneath, because you know what it's like to feel lost. You know what it's like to feel angry. Like, even if it's not in that exact same situation.
Yeah, Brene talks about that a lot. And
Yes.
I also like how she kind of adds on, you don't have to agree or even understand,
Yep.
just believe them. Believe them
Right.
that that's how they are feeling. And that's a
Exactly.
huge
Yeah.
step.
I love the empathy lesson. I tell people, like,
Yeah.
when I teach the empathy lesson, it's like, we're going to sit beside people who look different, feel different, and believe differently than us. And when they tell us what it's like to live their lives, we believe them, because we are not the expert on their life. They are. So you believe them. And like, there's that lack of curiosity, right? That's come up. Like, we just can't, we're so in our own scope that we're really struggling to consider what it may feel like, look like, or be like for someone else.
And
And that's
yes. And I have found, and I love the word curious. It's something that I talk
me
about
too.
all the time. I think it is one of the healthiest things we can even do for ourselves, is just don't try to make up a story. Don't don't give in to like an immediate reaction. Just be curious. It's
Yep.
so much better for you. It's so much better for them.
Yes. All
Everybody
the way
wins.
around. Yep. The shaming, judging, blaming, all of that will not help. It does not help. Like, what's this about? Like, what is this really bringing up for me? Like, because most likely it's tied to a pain point of yours. It's brushing up against your values. It's something that is happening for you. It's not usually about the other person. It's
Yes,
usually about our own stuff.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so kind of continuing with Brene Brown's book, because it is trying to teach us a language behind these emotions. It is so true that when you ask somebody, name the emotions, they can only name three, happy, mad, sad.
Totally.
And
Yep.
there's so many more. And I
Yeah.
think the past 2 years, we have felt them all.
Yeah. And all at the same time, sometimes all within one day. Like, yep,
yes.
there's room to feel more than one emotion at the same time. I call that the permission of the and, like that, feel it. It's uncomfortable. You're not supposed to necessarily like it. And I actually do promise that like your wholeheartedness, like your truth will shine through that, because like just that, like that element, there's always light in the dark. There really is. And it's not to negate how hard the dark is. And it's not to be all toxic positivity. It's simply to make room for both and live in the tension.
Yes. And I think a great one to talk about when it comes to living intention is around anxiety. I did a couple of YouTube videos just the past couple of weeks, and I broke down the first chapter of that book was stress and anxiety,
Yes.
overwhelm, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And that video has done better than any of the other ones I've posted. Now that could be a lot of reasons, but I believe, I think a lot of it is because everybody is identifying with those feelings right now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's so
So
much uncertainty and change.
yes,
Like, even though change is constant, we don't like it.
right.
Like, it's because it's uncomfortable, and the uncertainty has just been, well, it's been hard to, like, no matter what you believe about any of the issues that there are to have strong opinions about in the last 2 years, like, it's been very difficult to discern what truth is.
Yeah.
No matter what side you're on. Like, I don't care how strongly you think about your side. Like, I'd be hard pressed to think that anyone would be like, yeah, that was the truth, and it's still the truth today. Really? Because so much has changed. I mean, because we've never done this before. We've never lived through something like this. Like, and so that is anxiety provoking.
That's a great observation. And I don't think a lot of people have been talking about that. The idea of, I don't even know what's true anymore.
I know. Well, and like, how much does that, like, I mean, that's the ultimate uncertainty, right? Like, to not know, like, I don't know what to believe, and I don't know what's true. And so, and how much has that made us just dig our heels in more into the one side, right? And live even more in the silo. And I mean, that's created so much of the division. And that I had a full training last week. I was like, the world is set up to make you believe that you are alone, that no one will help you, that you are the only one to feel this way. That's how the world is set up. And like, and on top of that, whoever you want to call they make money off of you believing that, because they're going to sell you something to make you feel better, to tell you that you have to do better, look better, be better, to fix that part of you. And I am telling you, like, you are human as long as you have breath. And even after you don't have breath, you matter, and you are not alone. You're not the only one to ever feel this way, ever, ever, ever. Like, you're never, ever, ever alone. Like, if that's the only thing you take out of these 24 hours of training, I need you to hear me on that. Like, because that anxiety in the world, it's literally built to make us believe that. And it's one of the greatest lies.
Yeah. The feeling of being alone and not having anyone to go to. I think that's why I hear a lot of people these days talking about why communities are such a big deal right now, is even when you can feel alone when you're surrounded by hundreds of people.
Yes.
But then, like, physically separate us at the same time.
Right.
And it's really hard. And like you said, can just feel the feelings of anxiety, whether you're already a person that kind of tends to have anxiety type traits. But even if you don't, you can have very severe feelings of anxiety.
Right.
And
there's part of me that I'm anxious. And especially as someone who works in mental health, like, I am excited to see the data. Like, what does this look like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? Like, mental health wise, like, organization culture wise, like, how it worked out in our homes. Like I'm married to someone, like, he is not anxious about anything. I mean, one of the famous lines from my first book is like, do you have an emotion about this? Because, like, I have all of them, and I feel all of them to, like, the 1,000,000th degree. Like, do you have, like, he's not made that way. And so, or his life has not triggered it, right? Like, because we can't also argue that, but, like, so that's part of it. Like, how many people are kind of like Chad in that, like, they've never experienced any anxiety. They've never felt a racing heart, ruminating thoughts, the churning of the belly. They've never felt the doom and the gloom. And the last 2 years, they got a little taste of it. Does it go away after we kind of return to normal, whatever that is? Or does it stay? Like, and there's so many things that play into that trauma history, what our nervous system is wired, like what our trauma history has done to our nervous system, how we grew up, like our just personality, how our brain is wired, gender probably plays into it, gender roles play into, I mean, there's so many pieces that go into that like I'm so curious about that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, and thank you for bringing out my scientific part of me.
Yeah.
What data do we have currently that you've read or seen over the past 2 years?
I the we were already in a mental health crisis before the pandemic.
Wow.
It just hadn't not quite revealed itself in the way it is now. We cannot argue with the numbers that there is, when it comes to what we know, especially in mental health, death by suicide, alcohol use, drug use, promiscuity, unplanned pregnancies, like just health issues of increased blood pressure and cancers and things like that. We cannot argue that many of those numbers are up. Now, there's lots of reasons, right? Like, do we know, like, it could be the isolation, it could be the long-term trauma and stress, it could be that, like, we can also argue like that stuff may have always been there and then our environment triggers it, right? We all the data still points to that, like your genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. And like, and I'm someone that has, I've experienced that. Like, I've done some genetic testing. I was always set up to be super sensitive to like histamines and toxins and fragrances, but I never was ever. I've never been an allergic kid. And then I had mold exposure, and I've been recovering from mold for 4 years, 2 years knowingly. And so like, but so that expressed those genes. And so I live a very clean life because I have to be cognizant of my toxic bucket, right? That toxic load. And so only time will really tell, can I clean up those genes and they go back to just being there? Or is it something I will always have to worry about? And so it's such fascinating research. And so the same goes for, or can go for, anxiety, right? Someone may have more anxious genes, it's there, and for whatever reason, their life never triggers it.
Yeah.
And then some of us aren't so lucky, maybe, if you want to call it luck. I don't know.
Yeah, my dad's a child psychiatrist, and I don't know if this comes from his background, but he always felt like there are certain people that just seem to always have bad luck, right?
Yes.
And then there's some people who just always seem to, it works out really well.
Yeah. Yeah. And when people kind of hear my life story, especially just my medical trauma, and because I'm working on changing that, right? Like, I'm working on changing this relationship that like I've allowed this story to be spoken over me. I've also believed in it, that I'm the unlucky. I am always going to be the worst case scenario. I will always have to suffer. And like, so I'm that piece of like, I'm changing that. I'm working on changing that, even if it like continues to come about. It also means I am one of the most resilient people you'll ever meet. I wish I didn't have to be so dang resilient, and I will be, right? Like, but I did a post on it a while back. I was like, I don't want to freaking stop calling me strong. I'm like, you're such a strong person. Like, I'm not this like this like person that, I don't want you to gawk at me. Like, I just can't imagine. I would never be able to live through that. And it's like, you'd be surprised what you can live through when it's put in front of you.
Yeah.
You always have a choice. They may be really crappy choices in front of you. Still a choice.
Amen.
Still a choice.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up, because you're right. Even if you do seem to feel like you're an unlucky one, you don't need to further self-fulfill that prophecy, right?
Right.
And you always have control over your mindset and your choices. So
right. And it's not in this place, because I can get real passionate about this piece. It's not in this place where we're like growth mindset, positivity all the time. Like, we do not need to deny that this is really this life is hard.
Yeah. We
were told it would be. We were also told it would be abundant. And there is room for both of those things all at the same time. And so like, I'm not, because that's the interesting part when people are like, oh, you're a motivational speaker. I'm like, no, I'm not a motivational speaker. Not my job to motivate you. That's internal. Like, my story may inspire you. More importantly, what I hope to do is that you will walk away with some skills, tools, and language to actually make real change in your life, not just be inspired. And so like, I will never not share the hardship, because it is in that when those of us who have struggled with anything and we refuse to suffer silently, we give someone else permission to refuse to die alone. And we can all then walk into our freedom together. And so like, tell your dang story when you're ready to tell it, right? Like, but I will never get up on a stage. And I've been asked, like, well, could you like not talk about like the hard things? Nope. Then I'm not.
Someone asked you that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You'd be surprised what they asked me to do. Yeah. And I just want like, and if anyone's ever seen me teach, like it is my stories that bring the work into your muscle. Like it really is. Like, even if you've never had an infertility story, even if you don't have a health battle, like it has added to the teach. I know it, because it helps you find your fight a little bit too.
Yeah. No, showing the humanity, right? It is a balance of hard and good and challenge and beauty. You get it all. And I think something that Brene said in a podcast not long ago is the emotion that people are scared of the most is joy.
Yeah.
Because it is the most vulnerable emotion.
Yeah.
And
people are always so surprised by that.
Well, the person she was talking to was surprised too. Yeah.
Yep.
This conversation is not done, so make sure you subscribe to the channel to check out the part 2 where we go into Justine's book. And also, if you're interested in learning more about the video I talked about in this video about Brene Brown's most recent book, Atlas of the Heart, make sure you click wherever this video is to make sure you go check out that video. And then also another video that YouTube thinks you will want to watch. Until next time.